Next Curve.
Welcome to another episode of neXt Curve's Rethink podcast, where tech industry thought leaders discuss the trends and technologies that are shaping our digital future. And I'm Leonard Lee, Managing Director and founder of neXt Curve. And today I'm happy to once again have Foong King Yew, a former Gartner colleague of mine and a leading ICT industry analyst, joining me. Welcome, Foong. Glad to have you again.
Thank you, Leonard. It's certainly good to be back again.
Foong, you most recently wrote a couple of interesting pieces, and one of them was entitled Postcards from the Edge. And I thought it would be fun and interesting for our neXt Curve audience if we riffed on the question of how operators are positioned to win 5G gold. And, as you know, Edge is a big part of the 5G story. But maybe we don't just focus on Edge, but we ask the broader question, how are operators positioned for the 5G race, if you will? Because I think one of the comments that you made is that they are greatly optimistic about 5G looking forward, but is there a lot of justification for that optimism? Do they have a fight ahead of them?
Very good question, Leonard. Certainly, many communication service providers, or CSPs, I call them for short, are certainly very enthusiastic about opportunities afforded by 5G, in conjunction with technologies, such as edge computing, artificial intelligence, the IoT, analytics, right? And a lot of them are looking at this segment as sort of like a growth opportunity for them, and they have started to partner with many hyperscale cloud service providers in order to offer the products and services to the market, because many of these CSPs lack the cloud computing competencies. Mm-hmm. Now, the opportunities are certainly there in the market. Mm-hmm. Unfortunately, with the COVID-19 situation, the market clarity has become a bit obscured, I would say. We don't know how long this pandemic will last, what will be the impact of the pandemic on the enterprises, technology plans, so on and so forth. So that is the uncertainty there. And it will also impact the pace of the development of the 5G, of the 3GPP standards for 5G, release 17 and beyond. What will be the impact? How much delays will that incur? So there are some of these uncertainties out there in the market, which brings me to the point that here the CSPs really need to segment the market very, very carefully. Now, let me explain a bit what I mean by this. In any market, there are always two types of enterprises. The first ones are the leaders, the technology risk takers who would willingly take on any new technology in order to widen their competitive gap vis-a-vis their competitors. And then there are this other group who are more conservative, more risk averse. They will let others take the lead first, and then they try to be a fast follower. So clearly, in order to progress, the CSPs need to identify the nature of the enterprises and target the right segments to move forward. If they were to go into the market with a broad brush approach, then it will be a very unfocused go-to-market strategy. And I don't think that it will be appropriate at this point in time.
When we talk about 5G, don't you think the market opportunity is quite different from what we saw in the past with previous generations? I mean, we hear a lot about enhanced mobile broadband. We hear a lot about URLLC, which is ultra reliable, low latency communications, and then massive machine type communications, pillars, if you will, of how we are being told to understand 5G, but then a lot of what 5G is geared toward is expanding the purview and the scope of mobile computing and mobile networks, essentially, beyond just what the carriers were used to. Now we're looking at these industrial use cases and scenarios and consequently market opportunities. So in a way, don't you think that the CSPs are being really compelled and forced to look at the 5G market opportunity in a very different way than what they did in the past?
5G opens up new opportunities. Now, in the past, right, 3G, 4G technologies, the CSPs tend to focus first on the consumer market. Yeah. Now, 5G opens up new opportunities. Private networks, network slicing, etc., etc. And I believe the enterprise segment over the mid to the longer term will offer tremendous opportunities to CSPs, right, on the private network front. Now, the key unknown here is whether the enterprises would prefer to go on their own, engage a systems integrator, or a network equipment provider to build their own private networks, or to go with the CSPs and get a slice of their network to establish their own private networks. Now, I suspect that the larger conglomerates, right, the big, large MNCs, they do have their own capabilities, and some of them have stringent security, data privacy requirements. They may go the way of their own private networks. And some of the other enterprises, maybe due to lack of resources or lack of skills and capabilities, they will take a network slice from the CSPs. Right. So this goes back to my equation earlier on, where I said that the CSPs need to segment the market very carefully. Right. Depending on the needs and the requirements of each of these enterprises, and also their risk-taking mentality.
And I also think, especially because of this whole movement toward the use of unlicensed spectrum, and with 5G, you're looking at enterprise scenarios where the customer is looking at maybe capitalizing on these unlicensed bands and being able to launch or implement their private networks for various purposes, whether it's for general campus connectivity or it's for connecting assets and mobile devices in a smart factory or a smart warehouse, if you will, right? And so the question really is, are these the areas where the revenue pools are starting to form going forward? And if so, how well is the operator really positioned to capture that revenue and then maybe the profits that are associated with it, right? And then, the profitability of these segments, of course, are going to be a question that will start to be answered in the near future. But I think those are some of the perspectives that that the industry needs to kind of consider.
Oh, there are a few questions embedded in it, Leonard. So I'll try to go through it one by one. The opportunity, yes, I'm seeing the opportunities starting to roll, right? There are use cases ready, or even I would say, commercial deployments in the mining industry, manufacturing industries, transports and logistics, port operations, for example. We are seeing a lot of these cases coming on. As to whether or how the CSPs can capture these opportunities, there are a few factors to consider here. Firstly, their go-to-market or sales capabilities. And what I mean by that is, how well do the CSPs understand the industry challenges faced by these enterprises working in these industry verticals? Do their sales force have the competencies, the knowledge to engage the senior management of these companies in the discussion over business values, business outcomes? And here is where I see there's a tremendous gap here and big variance amongst the CSPs around the world. So that's one. And secondly is whether they have whether the CSPs have the full suite of capabilities to address the opportunities. Clearly, when you talk about 5G deployments together with edge computing for these enterprises, you need professional services, consulting, implementation, and perhaps managed services after the project has been delivered and handed over to the enterprises. Now, some CSPs have the capabilities. They have an SI arm. That's all well and good. For those who do not have it, then they would have to establish strategic partnerships with their preferred SI partners and go to market together and capture the opportunities. So it's not a blanket one single formula that will serve all the CSPs equally well.
I think there's also a gap in the other direction as well in understanding or experience. Even with IT service providers, many of them that have been primarily focused on internal enterprise services, now looking at things such as IoT for industrial, getting into the OT world, they're now starting to have to understand communications technology. And, with edge computing, it really changes the game, right? Because now cloud is creeping out toward the edge of the network. And as you look at these new applications, especially in the 5G world, the SIs are going to have to start to understand telco networking technologies, as well as consider how do these IT services now play on top of a carrier's infrastructure, right? And in particular, the edge clouds that are emerging, I would say. They're not prevalent, but they're emerging.
Well, that's also a very interesting angle to that, Leonard. Mm-hmm. Yes, clearly the SIs and also the hyperscale cloud service providers, they lack the understanding of networking, communications, 5G, right? But the key question here is whether or if, right, communications and networking is a critical economic value creator for all these opportunities. How much or how big a slice of the pie will the CSPs capture if they were just to focus on connectivity and 5G versus the other players who are participating in professional services, edge computing, applications, and software and security, plus the analytics as well? I would hazard to think that these latter components will form the lion's share of the economic pie. Right, so it is very critical for the CSPs over the longer term, right, to acquire their own set of capabilities so as to capture more of the opportunities that are created. Otherwise, for every dollar of revenue that is being created, right, 80 cents may go to the hyperscale cloud providers and you get 20 cents.
Right.
Now, that's not necessarily bad, right? It's still incremental revenues for the CSPs. But the question is, if they want to get more of the economic pie, then they have to up their game.
Right.
And that's where I see the challenge lies, right? And it's not going to be easy as well, because I predict that the connectivity and the networking component, right, over time is going to be commoditized as well. The CSP market is highly competitive. And the cloud providers have no shortage of partners to choose from. From an enterprise angle as well, right? We still don't know whether the enterprises will prefer to have their edge computing on-site, on-premise, or whether they want to host, the storage compute capabilities on the telco edge.
Right.
That's still sort of like an open question. So it's still, I would say, open season for all the players, which means that the CSPs, again, really have to understand the enterprise customers well, segment the market carefully, and craft the right marketing messages, focus on the business outcomes, in order to make progress in this space.
So don't you think that there's a real chance that operators will miss out on the boat again in terms of positioning themselves for 5G gold, if we can call it that for simplicity's sake? You mentioned the cloud hyperscalers a number of times, but they seem to be pretty well poised to take on a lot of the opportunities that are related to edge computing, right? At least from a compute and software perspective. Now, real estate is the challenge for them, and edge computing is going to be, especially the whole edge cloud game, if you want to call it public edge cloud game, is going to be a different game. I don't think the large hyperscalers are particularly good at it. They're pretty much as in the dark as the telcos are in how these edge clouds need to be set up, managed, orchestrated, and eventually monetized. So do you think that these players such as Amazon and Microsoft, with some of the moves that they've made, and we in our last meeting we talked about Microsoft's acquisition of Metaswitch and Affirm Networks, you think these guys are out to get the operators' lunch, 5G lunch?
Now that's a very interesting question, right? And if you look at the past precedents, 3G, 4G, the folks that have captured most of the value created by these networks have been non-CSPs, whether it's Apple iTunes or someone else like Netflix,
OTT,
or what do you call it? Your term, under the table?
Oh no, under the bottom. No, that's
Under
Facebook with tip.
Right.
That's Facebook with tip. That's like attacking the infrastructure, with all this open RAN, open technologies. And not only are they going after the carrier's business, but they're also looking at disrupting the service provider ecosystem that supports the telcos. That's just sort of how we were looking at it when we came up with the term as part of
back to the question. Right? So the crux of the question is this: will history repeat itself?
Right. Exactly.
And also depends on who you ask, right? Some analysts will have a glass half empty mentality, and some will have a glass half full mentality. Mm-hmm. My personal belief is it all depends on how the CSPs segment the market and target them. Mm-hmm. Now, clearly the likes of a Microsoft Azure, Amazon Web Services, and Google, they will not be targeting the entire spectrum of the market. So the CSPs, I believe, do have a chance if they know how to segment the markets correctly and target the right segments and make the right strategic partnerships and go to market. Then they have a chance, right? And at the same time, building up the long-term capabilities that are required so as to not to depend entirely on the partners over that long period. Over time, you have to do some of the critical tasks and the critical initiatives yourselves. Otherwise, they'll be faced with a leakage of economic profit. Mm-hmm. So if they do it right, they have a chance, right? And they might even also want to innovate from a business model perspective. They could maybe go for a business outcome-based proposal to the enterprises, sharing the benefits of the cost reduction or the benefits of new revenues being generated by their enterprise customers. Now, 5G affords new kinds of business models to be tried. So it is up to the CSPs really to innovate, to zig when the others zag, and to make a difference. And I believe this is one of the ways where they can compete and coexist together with the hyperscalers?
My thought is this, is that that's a decision that needs to be made, right? If you're going to innovate, you really need to kind of own the technology. You need to want to drive the innovation by also driving the evolution of a lot of the technologies that would support that innovation. And what I think that translates into in terms of a choice for the CSPs is, are you going to get good at edge? Because the cloud guys are trying to get good at edge. And if you're going to get good at edge, Mr. Carrier or Mrs. Carrier, you need to get good at cloud, or at least this concept of cloud native, right? Otherwise, because, edge, I think, is going to be a completely different game, because it's highly distributed. It's a highly distributed network of computing. It's the large, multi-tiered fabric of compute, right? That can arguably be thought of as an extension of cloud, but it's more of a physical implementation and a logical extension of cloud. I think that's the way I have to think about it. But that doesn't mean that the cloud guys, the big cloud players, are good at managing what needs to be out at the edge. And I think that is the big opportunity. So if you look at the core business of delivering edge cloud services, if you want to call them big edge players, you really need to figure out your commitment to pursuing that, with the clear recognition that the likes of Microsoft, Amazon, and others are licking their chops going after that piece. So the question is the CSP going to be OTT'd again, like what you're saying? The segmentation, I think that's a really great point, but it's going to be a challenge because you have to really think about what are some of those high value use cases, industrial use cases and industrial segments that you're going to go after. And I mean, a lot of people talked about autonomous vehicles and robotic surgery as being some of these showcase use cases, but they're not quite panning out exactly the way that folks thought.
One other point that I like to bring out, right? With regards to this market segmentation, to do it right, to do it effectively, it all boils down also to the CSP's organizational setup, and the effectiveness. So what I mean by this is that in many CSP organizations, there is a disconnect within the sales force and the other business units or functional units within the CSP organization. In truth, to be effective in market segmentation, you need to have a very good market sensing mechanism. And to bring the data or the insights from this sensing mechanism back into the larger organization. So in other words, the sales department needs to work very, very closely with the internal product development teams, with the marketing teams, with the IT department and the networking department, so that everybody is on the same page. So it's like the conductor of the Berlin Philharmonic, right? You need to make sure the strings section, the woodwinds, and the percussion section, they have to come together to make beautiful music. So the same thing with this internal functional units, sales, product development, IT, and networking. They need to come together regularly and look at, hey, what's the market doing out there? Where are the opportunities? What are the business challenges? Should I be going for this industry vertical or that one? So with all these insights, it helps to better prioritize the resources, to better craft the go-to-market messaging, and also to develop the most compelling products and services that are required out there in the market. So I still find that a lot of CSPs haven't got this right. And this is so crucial if they were to succeed in the 5G markets in the next few years to come.
That'll have a lot of implications on how they partner, right? And I think that's one of the big challenges that CSPs face for their organization is, how much do we reinvent ourselves as a business? You mentioned business model. A business model, how do we reinvent ourselves, or do we figure out how to partner and develop dependencies on possibly OTT and UTB players? And that sort of seems like the dynamic that's playing out a bit. We're seeing CSPs partnering a lot more than reinventing themselves. I think there's been a lot of backing off of owning the edge, if you will, right? There's been the partnerships between, let's say, I think it is like Verizon and Microsoft, and you have, or is it AWS? But there's a lot of US carriers partnering with the big cloud players, and in a way kind of conceding a portion of the edge cloud opportunity. So I think going forward, the CSPs, as they look at themselves, they have to make a decision as to what they want to be as they move forward in the era of 5G.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. I think the question of whether to build one's own or to partner, that question has always been around for the longest time, and it's not an easy question to answer, because it all depends on the CSP's strategic intent. Mm-hmm. Who do they want to be when they grow up?
Right.
And that has to be the topmost consideration, because it drives all the following underlying decisions that are going to be made. Now that's one. And the other point I see is that CSPs cannot avoid partnerships. No single entity can do everything end-to-end on their own. Like even the hyperscalers, they don't have the networking, the local physical sites for the edge computing. They need to partner. But the critical thing here is for the CSPs to identify what are the critical capabilities and skill sets that they need to own themselves, and then what that is not necessary to own, and then they can partner. Or if they may decide that I need to own these capabilities, but it's too difficult, it takes too long a time, and this market is hugely or highly competitive. It does not make sense for me as a latecomer to go in. So in that sense, then they will say that, okay, it's just better for me to partner. Let me develop some adjacent skills that leverages on this core technology, and then maybe I attack this problem from a different angle. So instead of going into the cloud computing technologies per se, I could maybe develop capabilities to learn how to manage the enterprise's cloud computing operations, to keep the lights on for them, or to do after sales service support, for example.
Or at least do that for the edge, right? Because you might have enterprises, they want to host the workloads at the edge and balance that with what they put in the big cloud, if you will, and then what they manage or deploy on-prem.
But they certainly need to have a better, deeper understanding of the industry verticals first.
Right. Yeah.
What are the pain points? What are the key challenges? What are the business vision? And to make sure that the technology solutions that they bring onto the table, right, is aligned with the enterprise's vision. And then things will go more smoothly in that sense, and both parties can then cross the river together.
Let's cross the river together. And on that note, thank you so much for joining again and coming on the program. Just wanted to give you an opportunity to tell our listeners and viewers how they can get in touch with you and engage with your thought leadership.
Certainly. Thanks very much, Leonard. For those listeners and viewers who are interested to find out about 5G strategies, edge computing strategies, where are the opportunities, and how the CSPs can go to market to capture these opportunities, feel free to reach out to me via LinkedIn. I'll be happy to respond to any queries there. Thank you very much.
Thanks to our viewers and listeners. We hope you join us next time for another episode of Rethink. And if you haven't already, please subscribe to our YouTube channel. We have a Apple podcast channel as well. Please subscribe to our research blog at www.next next-curve.com. So once again, Foong, thank you so much. Hopefully we'll have you on again sometime soon.
Thank you, Leonard. It's always a pleasure to be on your show.
Visit us at www.next-curve.com.